The nobleman's daughter leapt from the wagon and ran toward the dying Minone, branded an enemy of her bloodline. The sun burned low across the Arizona horizon, casting long crimson shadows over the dusty trail. Wagons creaked and groaned as they pushed westward, the sound of horses' hooves muffled beneath layers of fine red dust. Inside the last carriage, Caroline Ashcroft sat still, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if she could hold herself together through sheer will. The corset bit into her ribs, a reminder of every whispered judgment, every silent glance cast her way. She shifted uncomfortably, wiping sweat from her brow, though it did little to ease her discomfort. Her traveling dress, designed for appearances back east, was hopelessly impractical here. But that was Caroline's life, always dressed for the wrong occasion, always trying to fit into a world that had long since rejected her. She glanced at her father, seated across from her, his face drawn and shadowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Elias Ashcroft, once a man of great standing in Virginia, now bore the weight of financial ruin, a failing ranch, and the shame of a daughter who had not married. His jaw was clenched, eyes distant. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. Caroline knew the silence was not anger, but grief. This journey was not punishment. It was surrender. She had overheard the whispers between her father and his advisors. Debts too large to repay, land disputes with powerful men, and an agreement on last desperate effort to salvage their name. A marriage arrangement. Not love, never love, but perhaps protection, and a dowry substantial enough to keep what remained of the Ashcroft legacy. It was not her father's fault entirely. He had tried, in his own distant way, to shield her from the cruelty of society, but the whispers had followed her everywhere. Such a shame about the girl. Pretty eyes, but how unfortunate her size. No suitor would take on that burden. She had tried. Starvation disguised as dieting, dresses tightened until her breath came in gasps, dances attended with practiced smiles, her heart shrinking each time a gentleman turned away. The final insult had come the previous winter, when a widowed banker from Boston, 20 years her senior and twice as cold, retracted his proposal upon seeing her in person. Since then, her father had grown quieter, and the world colder. A sudden jolt rattled the carriage as it slowed. Caroline looked up sharply. Her father was already leaning toward the window, pulling back the flap. Shouts echoed from the front of the caravan. One of the riders galloped past, his expression grim. "Trouble ahead," Elias murmured, mostly to himself. Caroline's pulse quickened. Moments later, the carriage rolled to a halt. Her father opened the door and stepped out without waiting for assistance. Caroline hesitated, then followed, her boots sinking slightly into the dust. The light hit her like a furnace, but something else stopped her breath. A body sprawled near the edge of the trail, half covered in sand and blood. A man Apache, by his dress and braids barely clinging to life. Caroline's breath caught. The heat, the dust, the stench of iron and gunpowder clung to her senses. She turned to her father, who stood staring at the wounded man. His face was unreadable. "He's alive," she said softly. "I can see that," Elias replied, his voice hoarse. The men nearby muttered. One guard spat on the ground. "Let him die. We've no business with their kind." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "He's a human being." Her father sighed, rubbing a weary hand over his face. "We cannot afford to help him, Caroline. We don't know who attacked him or if they're nearby. We have no time, no supplies to spare." She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, saw not the powerful man she had always feared disappointing, but a man broken by burdens too heavy to bear. Still, something inside her recoiled. "If we leave him here, he'll die," she whispered. Elias closed his eyes. "Then God have mercy on us all." He turned back toward the carriage. Caroline stared at the wounded man. His chest rose and fell in shallow jerks. His face twisted in pain, lips cracked from the heat. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her bag. Caroline's fingers closed around the leather strap of her satchel. The weight of it was barely noticeable against the heaviness pressing down on her chest. She looked once more at her father's back as he walked away, then turned and took a single step toward the dying man. Miss Ashcroft, one of the guards warned, stepping in front of her. "You ought not." She brushed past him without a word. Her boots kicked up dust as she moved. With each step, a dozen voices screamed in her mind: propriety, obedience, fear. But louder than them all was the echo of something deeper, an ache she had carried her whole life. The ache of being overlooked, of being silent while others decided her worth. She knelt beside the man. His skin was burned, his chest slick with blood. The wound was ugly, deep and fresh, a bullet wound. Flies buzzed around it. Caroline swallowed hard and opened her satchel. She pulled out a strip of cloth, a flask of water, and a needle wrapped in linen. The supplies were meager. She had packed them more out of habit than expectation, but they were all she had. As she tore a strip of her underskirt, the man's eyes fluttered open. They were dark, so dark they seemed to reflect the desert sky, and filled with pain. He didn't speak, only watched her. Not with fear, not even surprise. With something stranger, clarity, as if he had known she would be there. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said gently, her voice unsteady. She cleaned the wound as best she could. Her hands moved awkwardly, but deliberately. The man's breathing hitched, but he didn't resist. Caroline could feel every eye in the caravan on her, burning with judgment, confusion, perhaps even disgust. When she tied off the cloth, she looked up to find her father standing a few feet away. His expression was carved from stone. "Caroline," he said. She stood slowly. "I'm not leaving him. You don't know who he is." "I don't care." "Then you're a fool." She nodded, a small, bitter smile curling at the edge of her lips. "I've been called worse." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred the dust between them. Elias looked at his daughter, not the girl who had failed to charm suitors, not the burden he had carried on his conscience, but the woman kneeling in the dirt, blood on her hands, her body between danger and a stranger's death. And for that brief instant, he almost said something. But whatever words hovered on his lips were swallowed by the weight of years and regret. He turned away. "I'll have a canteen and rations left beside the road," he said over his shoulder. "That's all I can give." Caroline didn't reply. She only turned back to the man, who had closed his eyes again. When the dust of the departing caravan settled, silence returned to the desert. She sat beside the wounded man until the sun dipped below the hills. The wind grew cooler, but her skin still burned from the heat of the day. She sipped water, then gently touched his forehead. "I don't know your name," she said, "and you don't know mine. But tonight we survive, both of us." His eyes opened briefly, and his lips parted. "Kaitan," he rasped. She blinked. "Kaitan," she repeated softly. "I'm Caroline." Then, almost imperceptibly, Kaitan nodded. And Caroline knew. That day, she saved a dying man, and also severed the last thread binding her to her old world. Before we dive into everything, let us know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? Connecting with viewers from all across the world has been a huge source of inspiration for us. The last light of day bled away, leaving the desert wrapped in a strange, echoing quiet. Caroline crouched beneath a cluster of sun-scorched rocks, her skirts torn, her hands smeared with blood and dirt. The man, Kaitan, lay unconscious beside her, his breathing shallow but steady. She had dragged him here with sheer determination, her legs burning from strain, her back soaked in sweat. The heat of the day had begun to vanish, replaced by a creeping chill that gnawed at her through the thin fabric of her dress. Around them, the land stretched silent and endless. The silhouettes of distant mesas cut jagged lines into the indigo sky. There were no trees, no shelter, just earth, wind, and shadow. Caroline pressed her hand to Kaitan's forehead. It was burning again. The cloth she'd tied around his wound had bled through. She carefully removed it, biting her lip as she cleaned it again with water from her flask. There was so little left. She measured each drop like it was gold. "You're going to be fine," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant it for him or herself. She looked around, searching for anything useful. A shallow rock shelf overhead offered partial protection. She took her shawl, already dusty and frayed, and pinned it across the gap between rocks, using her brooch and 2 iron buttons from her travel bag, forming a crude windbreak. It wasn't much, but it would shield them from the night air. When she sat down, her whole body ached. Her corset pinched cruelly, her feet throbbed, and every muscle quivered from exhaustion. She glanced at Caton again. His lips were dry, cracked. She dipped her fingers in the remaining water and brushed it gently across his mouth. He stirred slightly, but did not wake. Caroline leaned back against the rock wall, arms wrapped around her knees. The ache behind her eyes deepened. She was alone, truly alone. No servants, no father, no plan, and yet she felt more real here, in the dust and silence, than she had in years of drawing rooms and dinners. No one was watching her posture, no one correcting her laugh, no one whispering how she could be pretty if only. The thought stung, even here. She exhaled slowly and reached into her satchel, pulling out the half loaf of bread she had kept from the caravan's rations. It was stale and crumbling, but she tore it in half. One piece she tucked into Kaitan's blanket roll for when he woke. The other she ate slowly, chewing each bite to keep herself focused. As darkness deepened, the desert came alive with eerie sound crickets. The distant call of a coyote, the shifting moan of wind across the rocks. Caroline fed a few dry twigs into the small fire she had built in a shallow pit. The flames were low and careful, not enough to draw attention, she hoped, but enough to keep Caton warm. She sat beside him again and studied his face in the firelight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps not older than 30. His features were strong, but worn by the sun and hardship. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, and there were faint scars at the edge of his brow and cheek. But even now, in unconsciousness, his face held a quiet dignity. She sighed, drawing her knees closer. "I don't know who you are," she said softly, "or why you are out here, but something tells me you're not just anyone." Above them, the stars emerged, brilliant and sharp, like shards of ice scattered across velvet. Caroline felt the weight of everything she had left behind, but for the first time, that weight did not crush her. It simply settled. Like the sand around her, constant but not consuming. She would keep him alive, whatever it took, even if no one came for her, especially then. The wind shifted just past midnight. Caroline woke with a jolt, her hand instinctively reaching for Caton's forehead. His fever had not worsened, but his breathing was shallow, lips parted, barely clinging to wakefulness. She sat up slowly, ears straining. Then she heard it faint but deliberate, the unmistakable rhythm of hooves over hard-packed dirt. Her breath caught. Voices followed, low, gruff, and English-speaking. Not many, too, maybe 3 men. She couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was unmistakably coarse, sharp with purpose. These were not ranchers or soldiers on patrol. These were men searching for something or someone. She snuffed the small fire with a blanket, plunging them into darkness. Caton stirred but did not wake. Caroline placed a steadying hand on his chest, then moved quickly. Her eyes had already adjusted to the starlight, bright enough to cast faint shadows along the canyon walls. She scanned the area and spotted a rock crevice nearby, narrow, but deep enough to hide him. With trembling strength, she dragged Caton by his shoulders, careful not to disturb his wound. His head lolled against her chest. She paused once, nearly crying out when a sharp edge cut into her palm. But she bit down on the pain and kept moving. By the time she reached the crevice, the voices had grown louder. Laughter, cold and joyless, bounced off the canyon walls. She pushed Kaitan into the hollow, then followed, curling her body around his, wrapping them both in her travel cloak. They were barely shielded, just a few yards from where she had built the fire, but in this darkness, with luck, it would be enough. She dared not breathe. Footsteps scraped across the stone above. Loose gravel tumbled down the slope. "I swear I saw smoke," one voice growled. "Could be a signal," another replied, "or just some damn drifter freezing his butt off." Silence. Then the crunch of boots nearby closer. Caroline's heart pounded so loudly she feared it might give them away. She tightened her grip around Kaitan, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. His skin was damp, burning. He let out a faint, involuntary groan. She whispered into his ear, voice barely audible. "Please, please, don't make a sound." The footsteps stopped. She heard the man sniff the air. "Blood," he muttered. "It's close." A gun cocked. Her whole body stiffened. She squeezed her eyes shut. Thena paused. A long, tense breath in the dark. "Well?" Another voice called from above. The man hesitated. "Probably a coyote," he answered at last. "Plenty of dead things out here." Boots shifted. Gravel slid again. Then, slowly, the sounds retreated. First the voices, then the hooves, fading into the desert night. Caroline didn't move for a long time. Her body cramped from the awkward position, Kaitan's weight pinning her against the rock. Her mind replayed the words blood. Close. Probably a coyote, as if each one had been etched into her bones. When she was finally sure they were gone, she exhaled shaky, uneven, but alive. Kaitan stirred. His lips parted, whispering something in a language she didn't understand. She gently stroked his hair, voice low. "It's all right. They're gone." His eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. But for a moment, he looked straight at her. She froze. There was no fear in his gaze, no confusion, only awareness, as if he had known she was there the whole time. Then his eyes closed again. She leaned back, head resting against the stone wall. The desert night was colder now, but her skin was flushed with adrenaline. The brush with death had awakened something she hadn't felt in years, not fear, but resolve. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was protecting, and she would not fail. The morning came like a whisper over bone, quiet, dry, and relentless. Carolyn woke with Kaitan still cradled in her arms, his weight pressing heavily into her side. Her limbs were stiff, her dress damp with dew and sweat, but she didn't move. Not yet. She could hear birds now scattered and cautious. No sign of the men from the night before. The silence held, fragile and waiting. Gently, she eased herself out from beneath Kaitan, her arms sore from holding him so long. She checked his wound again. The cloth was soaked, tinged with deeper red than before. Her breath hitched. She needed something better, real bandages, or herbs with antiseptic properties. But all she had was a few linen scraps, a rusted sewing needle, and the last of her resolve. Kaitan groaned softly as she dabbed the wound, and this time, when she looked up, his eyes were open, not fever-glazed, not unconscious, open and watching. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her, breath slow but deliberate. There was no fear, no panic, just a raw steadiness that unnerved her more than any scream might have. She started, then stopped. What could she say? Instead, she held out the flask, tilting it toward his lips. He drank, swallowing with difficulty. When he finished, he rested his head back against the rock and closed his eyes. But then, after a moment, his fingers moved. Slowly, shakily, he reached inside the folds of his torn tunic and pulled something from within. A pendant. It was made of leather, beads, and bone simple, but meticulously crafted. A symbol etched in the center. 2 feathers crossing beneath a crescent moon. He held it out to her. Caroline hesitated, then accepted it. "It's beautiful," she said, voice soft. Kaitan spoke, his voice little more than a whisper. "Peace. Marker." His accent was thick, words clipped but meaningful. Caroline looked down at the pendant, understanding dawning in her chest. "A token," she said, "to show others I'm Not your enemy. He nodded weakly. She clutched it tightly in her palm. The beads were warm from his body, the string still stained with sweat and blood. But she could feel something else in its significance. Protection. Hope. Caton coughed, and she quickly supported his shoulders. When he settled again, he muttered a few more words. Betrayed. Soldiers. Not all white, not all bad. She stared. Is that what happened to you? He didn't answer. But the silence spoke volumes. He had been attacked by people who should have honored peace, not broken it. Caroline's stomach twisted. Her father had warned of tensions along the borders, but she had never imagined something like this so close, so cruel, so personal. You were trying to protect something, she whispered. Caton's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw the grief behind them. Not just pain, loss. Who are you? She asked quietly. His answer came slow, strained. Caton, son of Gray Elk, chief. Her breath caught. She looked again at the pendant. This wasn't just a man she had saved. This was the heir to an entire people. And if someone had tried to silence him, it meant his survival wasn't just personal, it was political. They would come again, and they wouldn't stop. Caroline gripped the pendant tighter. Her breath was shallow, her thoughts racing. The decision she had made beside the trail born of instinct, of compassion, had now become something far bigger than herself. She wasn't just tending a wounded man, she was protecting a future. That night, the stars seemed sharper. The desert had cooled into a quiet hush. Caroline crouched low by the small, crackling fire her back to the wind, eyes flicking toward Caton every few moments. He slept lightly now, not with the stillness of near death, but the restlessness of a man recovering. His breath no longer rasped, his skin no longer burned, but he was far from healed. She stirred the fire with a stick, watching the flames bite at the dry wood. It had been 2 full days since she had left her father's caravan. 2 days of hiding, nursing, and listening. She hadn't spoken much, not aloud, at least. But tonight the silence pressed too heavily on her chest. She glanced at Caton, who lay half-curled under her patched cloak. His face turned toward her in sleep, brow soft for once. "I used to think God had made a mistake," she said suddenly. Her voice startled her, cutting the stillness. She paused, as if waiting for an objection. None came. "I'd look in the mirror and wonder if there'd been a mix-up in heaven," she continued, her voice low. "Like someone else's body had landed on my soul by accident. Or maybe I was being punished, born into flesh that never seemed to fit." She laughed once, dry, bitter. "My mother died young. Consumption. My father, well, he's tried his best. But when you grow up hearing that you're not what anyone wanted..." She broke off, staring into the flames. "I tried to shrink myself, literally. Ate less, spoke less, dreamed smaller, hoping one day I'd become something acceptable, something they wouldn't whisper about behind teacups." She looked down at her hands, calloused now from dragging Caton across gravel and grit. "I failed, of course. I've always been. Too much. Too heavy. Too opinionated. Too stubborn." She poked the fire again, sparks leaping. "But here's the strange part. Out here, in this wasteland, I don't feel too much anymore." She turned her gaze toward Caton. His eyes were still closed, but his chest rose and fell with a steadier rhythm. The pendant he'd given her hung around her neck now, a cool weight against her skin. "I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe you'll die. Maybe I will. But for now, at least, I feel like I belong somewhere. If not in the world, then at least in this fight. For you. For something worth saving." Silence stretched long again. Then a voice's soft, rasped ped broke it. "You stayed." She blinked, heart leaping. Caton's eyes were open, dark and luminous in the firelight. He hadn't moved, but his gaze locked onto hers with quiet intensity. Caroline felt heat rise in her throat. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I did," she said finally. Caton nodded slightly. Then his eyes slid shut once more, but Caroline sat still, her heart beating a strange, steady drumbeat. He had heard her. every word, and he had answered with the only ones that mattered. At dawn, Caton tried to sit up. Caroline jolted awake at the sound of shifting gravel. He had braced himself on one elbow, jaw clenched tight, the effort clearly excruciating. Sweat beaded along his brow. But he was trying. She scrambled to his side. "Stop. You'll tear the stitches." His head turned toward her, eyes sharper now. "No time," he said hoarsely. "Need to move." "You can't walk," she protested. "Then crawl," he said, "or die here." She stared at him. The words weren't cruel, they were matter of fact, the calculation of a man who had lived too long on the edge of survival. "Wait," she said, holding up a hand. "Just wait. Let me think." They were still tucked beneath the rock ledge, but the signs were clear boot prints nearby. A broken sagebrush branch that hadn't been snapped by any animal. Whoever had been hunting them hadn't given up. Caton watched her, his gaze steady but unreadable. "You trust me?" she asked. He didn't blink. "You stayed." That was answer enough. Caroline dug through her satchel and found the cracked compass she'd taken from the caravan. Its needle spun lazily before settling. East. She scanned the sky, then squinted at the horizon. "We'll head northeast," she murmured. "There's a canyon not far if I'm right. It leads to the riverbed. We can follow it up into the high ridges." Caton exhaled, almost a nod. "Good. Can you guide me from here?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He pointed slowly, fingers trembling to a distant outcrop. "If you see twin peaks, like horns, that's home." Caroline turned. She could just make them out faint against the rising haze. Her stomach flipped. For the first time, the idea of a destination of somewhere safe felt real. Caton motioned to a jagged mark on the rock nearby. "Enemy leave sign, broken track, meaning trap." "You can read that?" she asked, half in awe. He looked at her, brow furrowed, as if the question confused him. "You cannot?" She laughed softly. "Number I was taught how to arrange flowers, not avoid ambushes." He closed his eyes briefly. "Strange tribe," he muttered. "You have no idea." She stood, brushing the dust from her skirts. Then, with effort, she helped him upright. His arms slung over her shoulder. His weight collapsed partially into her side. He was heavy, but not unbearable. The months she had cursed her strength or thickness, her broad frame suddenly became her salvation. Each step they took was slow, painful, and deliberate. But they were moving. That was everything. They made it a mile before Caton grunted and pointed ahead. "Watch," he whispered. Too quiet. Caroline squinted into the sun. The sagebrush swayed gently, but something felt off, too still, too hushed. "Stay here," she said, easing him to the ground. She crouched low, heart pounding, and crept forward. Her hands grazed the earth, her breath shallow. Around the bend, two men stood near a campfire, rifles slung carelessly. One kicked at the ashes, while the other paced. Both wore uniforms stripped of insignia, mercenaries, not soldiers. They were close. Too close. Caroline retreated quickly, heart in her throat. When she returned to Caton, she crouched low. "They're ahead, but they haven't seen us. We'll circle wide." He didn't respond at first, just looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "What?" she asked, breathless. "You're different now," he murmured. "Different how?" He touched the pendant at her neck, the one he had given her. "You see, you listen, you choose." She didn't know how to answer that. So she simply nodded, and they moved on. Together, clouds were gathering over the horizon, thick, bruised streaks of gray that churned low over the ridgelines like something wounded and angry. The kind of storm that didn't ask permission. Caroline felt the shift before she saw it. The wind had changed colder, carrying grit and tension. She adjusted Caton's arm over her shoulder and tightened the cloak around him. They had traveled nearly 4 miles since morning. Each step was an act of will. The pain in her feet had gone numb hours ago, replaced by a dull, rhythmic throb. Her mouth was dry. Her back screamed from the weight, and yet something deeper carried her forward. Ahead, The landscape was changing. The flat plains rose into cragged sandstone, weather-worn and split by time. Dry creek beds snaked through them, perfect for hiding or ambush. "We need shelter," she said. Caton nodded, though his skin was pale beneath the bronze. His eyes, always sharp, were dulled now with pain. They found a narrow stone overhang, nestled between two wind-worn bluffs, shielded from the main trail and concealed by desert brush. Just wide enough for the two of them. Caroline helped Cayetan settle against the back wall, then dropped beside him, her breath hitching. For a moment, there was only silence, the storm still distant, but promised. Then Cayetan spoke, voice roughened by exhaustion. "They will come again." She knew he didn't mean the storm. "They won't stop," he said. "They don't want me back. They want silence." Caroline looked at him, rain-spattered wind already whispering through the stone cracks above. "Then we don't let them win." "You are not warrior," he said gently. "No," she agreed. "But I'm stubborn. That counts for something." He gave the faintest smile. Then his expression darkened. "You saved me. But now, they may hunt you too." "Oh?" "I've been hunted my whole life," she said, pulling her shawl tighter, "by different wolves. Some wore silk gloves. Others just looked through me like I didn't exist." Cayetan's brow furrowed. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because I didn't fit." He didn't ask more. Instead, he reached for the satchel at her side and pulled out the broken compass. He examined it carefully, fingers brushing over its cracked glass face. "Direction still lives," he murmured, then pointed to the east. 2 days, maybe 3, if storm passes." Caroline watched the compass needle sway, then right itself. 3 days, she echoed, more to herself than to him. Suddenly, thunder cracked low and close. The wind howled, whipping grit across their shelter. She moved quickly, gathering dry brush and stones to block the sides. Cayetan tried to help, but his strength was waning fast. "Rest," she told him. "Let me do something useful for once." He watched her, and after a beat, nodded. They huddled together as the storm struck. Rain lashed sideways, cold and punishing, seeping through seams and stitching. Lightning flashed, revealing the barren shapes of distant cliffs, and thunder roared like ancient drums. Caroline leaned her head against Cayetan's shoulder. "If I die," she whispered, half joking, "at least it'll be in a dramatic setting." He didn't laugh. Instead, he whispered something in Apache, gentle, rhythmic. "What did that mean?" she asked. "A prayer," he said. "For strength, for honor." She smiled faintly. "I like that." They sat in silence, two souls pressed together by wind and fear, bound by fate and grit. And when the worst of the rain passed, and the sky quieted into soft sobs, Caroline felt something shift within her, not just resolve, but belonging. For the first time, she wasn't hiding from the storm. She was enduring it. And that was something no one could take from her. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. Dawn broke beneath a sky smeared with streaks of dusty rose, matching the endless walls of red sandstone looming above them. Caroline stirred, her body aching in every joint. She shifted to check on Cayetan, who slept fitfully against the canyon's rough wall. Every breath he took had the measured calm of someone fighting to live. Last night's storm had left them soaked to the bone. Their makeshift shelter rocks and brush pinned loosely offered scant protection from wind-driven rain. Caroline's dress clung to her, and the cold had seeped deep into her muscles. She rubbed her arms to chase away the chill, then gently roused Cayetan with a finger across his brow. He blinked into the fading shadows. "Water," he murmured. She nodded and pressed the leather flask into his palm. "Here." His eyes closed again after taking a few cautious sips. Caroline rose and gazed across the canyon floor. Patches of slick stone glinted where pools of rainwater collected. A shallow creek bed wound between rock outcroppings, their pathway toward the cliffs where the Apache village awaited. "Stay close to the shadows," Cayetan added in a rasp, as if reading her thoughts. He closed his eyes, drifting in and out of sleep. She knelt beside him, pressing her fingers into his cold skin. "When you wake, we need to move." Ugh. His eyes snapped open sharp, alive. "Half hour," he whispered. She gave him a small nod. Slipping away, Caroline scanned the path ahead. Mud and loose stones made footing treacherous. Every step would require care. The canyon walls curved toward each other 200 yards ahead, forming a narrow corridor. They must traverse it before the sun's glare turned the rocks into burning plates. She returned to Cayetan and helped him upright. He leaned heavily on her, his arm slung across her shoulders. They moved slowly. At first, each step was tentative, both trusting the other. The mud sucked at their boots, threatening to trip them. Caroline's dress caught on sharp stone. Cayetan paused to untangle Haran's unusual tenderness. She caught him glancing at her after. "Sorry for dragging you," she whispered. He shook his head. "Number, you saved me." His voice was raw. "I carry you." His words weren't pride, they were truth. They reached the narrow corridor as the sun lifted higher, light filtering in strips across the red dust. Caroline shielded her eyes with a hand, then guided Cayetan by the shoulder. They edged along the rocky walls, alert for danger, mercenaries or worse. Cayetan paused and touched the stone, running his fingers over etched symbols, Apache markings. "Signs of home," he said softly. "They marked this long ago." Caroline looked. Tiny carvings of hunts, ceremonies, names. She pressed her own finger to them first in reverence, then in tears. The weight of their journey pressed down on her soul. You belong," Cayetan said, voice gentle. "You carry our past forward." She blinked back tears. "I feel it," she whispered, "like a strange ache, like coming home." They followed the canyon further, exiting into a plateau dappled with sagebrush and wildflowers. The desert, after rain, blossomed tiny white and yellow petals, nodded in the breeze. Caroline knelt, cupping a blossom in her hand. It was delicate, defiantly beautiful. "This is life," she said, voice full of wonder. "Even here," Cayetan paused to watch. "Resilience." Caroline smiled through the ache. "Mine too." They continued until the plateau sloped upward toward a line of juniper trees. Beyond, in a shallow basin beneath towering red cliffs, they glimpsed smoke thin and pale, drifting above roofs made of wood and hide. The village. Cayetan's arm trembled around her shoulders. "Home," he whispered. Caroline glanced back at the canyon, carved by time and tempests, shaped by forces she could never control. But she understood something newly. Strength was not just survival. It was endurance and choice. She squeezed Cayetan's hand. "We go together." He nodded. "Nalani," he murmured softly, reverently. She blinked. He hissed the word again. "Nalani, the one who carries the light." It was the first time he'd spoken her new name in anger, fear, pride. She pressed it to her chest. "Nalani," she whispered, and took the next step toward the village, towards something impossible yet true. The first sight of the Apache village stole Caroline's breath. Nestled within a stone-ringed basin, the settlement lay peaceful beneath towering red cliffs. Smoke curled from several hearths, drifting like tendrils of invitation into the still morning air. Tanned hides and woven mats signaled community, a stark contrast to the desolation they had traversed. Caroline helped Cayetan take cautious steps down the gentle slope. His steps were slow but firm. Passing the junipers, they slowed to a halt. The world of Cassidy Creek and whispered judgments felt distant, nearly impossible, as she gazed at the figures moving within. Children chased each other barefoot, their laughter bright and free. Women wove baskets beside low fires. Hunters, gutting fresh game, worked near a central lodge. Every movement carried purpose, connection, and dignity. She swallowed hard. This was home. Not just for Cayetan, but perhaps for her too. Cayetan drew a slow breath. "Stay behind me," he whispered, guiding Caroline by the elbow. "My kin must trust you." They approached the edge of the basin, where two hunters paused, spears in hand. They sized Caroline, then Caton, hands twitching near their weapons. The taller hunter spoke in Apache. Caton bowed his head. Caroline attempted a respectful nod, catching the hastings of acceptance in the elder's eyes. A moment later, a second man appeared, a matriarch garbed in leather and colorful beadwork. A woven sash marked her status among the community. She assessed Caroline with quiet authority and addressed Caton, also in Apache. Caroline heard her say Caton's name and felt a sting in her chest. Caton responded with a sentence and motioned toward Caroline. She stepped forward, hesitant yet determined, a silent ambassador between worlds. The woman moved closer, silver hair and lined face that spoke of experience and caring. She studied Caroline without judgment, and then spoke a few words to Caton. He replied, then turned to Caroline. "This is Niley," he said softly. "My grandmother. She will judge." Caroline's throat tightened. "Yes, I'm honored to meet her." Niley held Caroline's gaze, then dipped her chin once and extended a hand. Its skin was rough, but her palm was steady. Caroline grasped it, awe flushing her cheeks in spite of herself. "Welcome," Niley said, her vocabulary limited, but the tone warm, carrying meaning beyond words. Cayetan appeared beside them. As if on cue, more villagers paused. Their gazes tracked Caroline, curious but calm. No hooting, no pointing, just quiet wonder. Niley guided Caroline toward the center hearth, laid on woven mats, and motioned for Caton to rest before the lodge doors. Caroline settled Caton down gently, shading his eyes with the edge of her hand. Niley emptied a clay pot of water and poured a small amount over each of their hands, ritual cleansing. Caroline instinctively reciprocated, washing out of habit, feeling warmth in her fingertips. A promise of refreshment. Nearby, a young mother placed a bowl of stew at Caroline's feet, her daughter hovering behind, gazing with awe. Caroline's hand hovered, but hunger, exhaustion, and gratitude overrode caution. She spooned a few bites, letting flavor and warmth pour into her bones. The child smiled, and Caroline returned it with a gentle nod. Then came a quiet turn of the head. Niley pointed toward Caton's wound and indicated they would bring medicine. Caroline caught her breath. She nodded. As the medicine woman moved on, the lodge door opened further. Two warriors entered, silent observers, protectors. They paused near Caroline and Caton, their vigilance respectful, silent. Caroline felt eyes on her, not with suspicion, but with questions. She set aside the empty bowl, placing it carefully outside the lodge's hearth circle. Then she stood and offered her hands to Niley again, whose nod invited her to show her own gesture of welcome, placing a single bead of water on Caton's forehead. Caroline mimicked the gesture carefully. Niley's shoulders relaxed. Village watchers relaxed too. A silence fell over Theman, neither tense nor easy, but pregnant with possibility. Caroline Neno Nalani exhaled, a small smile forming. Caton opened his eyes and offered her a quiet nod of gratitude. She responded, smiling more broadly, though exhaustion tugged at her bones. As midday sun warmed the basin, the villagers returned to work. A sense of welcome hummed low in the air. The village had tested her, and she had stepped into its center and passed. Walking beside Caton toward a shaded lodge, Caroline recognized a strange truth. She was no longer merely a guest. She had crossed the threshold, and in doing so, left behind a part of herself that might never return. The sun dipped low, painting the canyon walls in molten gold as Caroline and Nalani followed Niley along a narrow path winding through the village. The evening had a softness to it, as though the cliffs themselves breathed while the community prepared for nightfall. Niley led them to a small, open structure, a place where women gathered to grind corn, weave baskets, and share wisdom. Others paused to greet Nalani with nods of recognition, some carrying small keepsakes to show her, some offering nods infused with curiosity and trust. Inside, the air smelled of warm earth and grain. Women's hands moved in steady rhythms, stones crushing ears of corn into meal, fingers weaving delicate patterns into reeds. Naili gestured for Nalani to sit on a low matan invitation rather than a command. Nalani knelt and accepted a mortar stone. She glanced at Kaitan, who stood nearby, leaning against a post as if supporting her in spirit and deed. "Try," Naili encouraged, pointing to a handful of corn kernels. Nalani hesitated. She had never done such work. Her hands, though stronger, were unpracticed. But she pressed the stone down, grinding and feeling the coarse tickle of corn and sand beneath her palms. Nearby, an elder woman named Sitara offered a small bowl of spices-dried wild herbs and berries. Naili nodded, and Nalani added a pinch to the cornmeal until the scent struck her sense-sweet, earthy, alive. As the mixture thickened, Nalini felt an unfamiliar warmth blossom within her pride, belonging, and the realization that every movement mattered. Near the doorway, children gathered, watching with wide, speculative eyes. Nalani smiled at them, gratitude swelling. In that moment, she felt whole. Naili poured fresh river water into a clay bowl, rinsed Nalani's hands, then placed the bowl before her. Nalani drank, savoring cool hydroshanso, different from the stale water she'd carried across desert trails. Kaitan approached, placing a soft braid he had woven for her over her shoulder, a graceful touch of respect and affection. She placed her hand over his on her hair, their fingers brushing. Later, women gathered around a low fire as dusk deepened. Sitara began a songer voice, low and haunting, telling of times of scarcity and of survival. Some women joined with harmonies, and the children swayed quietly. The flames reflected in Nalani's eyes as she thought of her own journey. From a girl who'd shrank herself to avoid notice, to a woman unafraid to stand, carry, and belong. The song ended. Silence followed, soft and reverent. Naili touched Nalani's shoulder. "Welcome," she said again, this time conveying more than words. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, and ceremonial integration. Nalani returned her nod, overwhelmed by emotion. Kayatan circled the fire and knelt beside her. He leaned in close and spoke in Apache. "Your hands carry more than grain now. They carry life." Nalani smiled through tears. "In my old world, my hands only carried shame." He shook his head. "Not here. Here, they carry hope." She held his gaze and felt the room tilt. Something shifted. Not romance, but profound kinship. Into the moment walked Naeli's soft urging, "Stay for story." The elder raised her hands, and one of the younger women handed her a carved flute. Sitara began again, a melody born from the land and memory. Nalani closed her eyes watering as the music told of rivers carving canyons, moons crossing seasons, and hearts forging home. When the flute exhaled its final note, Nalani opened her eyes. She saw faces turn to her, not dismissive, not expectant, but curious and open. Naili spoke for the group. "Your journey, our journey. One path, one song." Nalani's throat tightened. She moved to speak, then paused as she realized. Words were not enough. She pressed her palm to her heart instead. That was her promise. Night settled fully then, and the villagers drifted away, sleep, meal, rest. Only Nalani and Kaitan remained by the fading embers. Kaitan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You belong," he whispered. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I do," she said, voice small but sure. And as the last embers winked out, Nalani understood that she had crossed the threshold from a life of shadows to a life rooted in stone, song, and a strength she never knew she possessed. As dawn touched the village with golden breath, and the first fire was rekindled, Nalani stood beneath the crimson cliff snow, longer a visitor, but a part of this sacred rhythm, ready to face what lay ahead. The morning sun filtered through juniper branches as Nalani awoke to the gentle murmur of the Apache village settling into its day. The scent of sage and fresh earth mingled in the air. She rose quietly, mindful of Kaitan sleeping nearby on woven mats outside the communal lodge. His breathing was even now no longer the ragged gasp of injury, but the deep, calm rhythm of recovery. It was her first true victory here. Naili appeared, wrapping Nakani in a light shawl. Without a word, the elder ushered her toward a small circle of stones surrounding a shallow pit. Several village women gathered, their garments a tapestry of woven colors and soft leathers. Each carried bundles of plants' roots, leaves, flowers gathered from the canyon slopes. Nalani followed, pulse quick, with anticipation and nervousness. Naili spoke first, her voice low and melodic in Apache. The women lowered their heads in respectful silence. Through Kaitan's soft translations, Nalani understood. This is the circle of healing, where the wounded are made whole by earth and spirit. Today, we give thanks that Kaitan lives. Naili pointed to a bowl of cool water, stirred with crushed juniper and sage leaves. Nalani knelt and dipped her hands in the mixture, feeling the coolness soothe her skin. The herb smelled like home wild, sharp, alive. Next came a wooden spoon holding a handful of ground roots chewed and offered by Naili. Nalani swallowed the bitter medicine, flames of flavor dancing on her tongue. It seemed to clear the last of her lingering doubt. Naili then placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, guiding her to step forward. The women parted, creating space near the fire. Kaitan rose slowly, supporting himself on an alder staff. The rustic staff still bore hand-wrapped sinewa craft Nalani remembered from her teenage years when her mother taught her about soft wood and binding. The parallel struck her heart. Nalani knelt beside Kaitan and, as instructed, applied salve to his wound. Made from mashed yucca and cedar resin, warm and sticky, it soothed the torn flesh. Kaitan winced, but did not cry out. She caught his gaze for a moment and saw gratitude, trust, and something deeper forming. Naili began to hum low and steady. Others joined. The hum grew into a chant, building into words Nalani couldn't understand, but felt in her bones. The staff-wrapped scent of cedar and sage filled the air. The women pressed their hands on Kaitan in turn, offering healing energy. When it was Nalani's turn, she closed her eyes and laid her hands lightly on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. She thought of their journey, the storm, the chase, the promise they made. In a moment, the chanting stopped. The silence reverberated, soft but powerful. Kaitan exhaled deeply. The tidal change was subtle, but his shoulders lowered. His expression softened. Naili turned and looked at Nalani, a small smile in her eyes. Then Kaitan did the same, pressing Nalani's hand before resting the staff at her side. The healing circle broke apart. Women murmured blessings in Apache. Some touched Nalani's arm or nodded with kindly eyes. The ritual had been about Kaitan Boot. The community's expression enveloped her, too. Later, in the shade of a wooden shelter, Nalani and Kaitan drank steaming tea, brewed from wild mint and juniper berries. The taste was warm, gentle, and revitalizing. Nalani felt her limbs relax, her back stop aching so fiercely. The ritual had sanctified her entry from outsider to healer in training. She met Kaitan's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He offered a small smile. "You did it." Nalani closed her eyes. In her chest, a quiet flame glowed hope, acceptance, and the beginning of purpose. The sun had climbed higher when Nalani followed Naili toward a sunlit courtyard. Children's laughter welcomed them. Small hands reached out, tugging gently at her skirts. Women paused in their work-grinding maze, weaving reeds, preparing hydesand, smiled in encouragement. Today, she would help. Naili guided Nalani to a low stone platform piled with freshly harvested corn. Several women demonstrated the rhythm. Tap the cob twice, then roll it against a wide, rounded stone to loosen the kernels. When her turn arrived, Nalani leaned forward, heart hammering, aware of dozens of gaze others were watching her poorly coordinated attempts. She tapped once then twice, but the kernels clung stubbornly. She tapped too hard, and the cob skidded from under her palm. A hush fell. Nalani froze, face flushed, cheeks burning with fresh embarrassment. A soft touch lifted her elbow and guided her in adjusting her grip. A woman named Sitara stepped in and said something in Apache, then demonstrated again. "Like this," she murmured gently. Nalani tried again. This time, the kernels fell free handfuls of golden maize rolling across the stone. The women nodded approval, a few murmurs of respect. A small cheer rose from the children nearby. Nalani smiled, feeling warmth bubble in her chest. She would learn. Next, a woven basket, reeds still damp and pliable. Another woman, Aida, showed her how to fold each strand over the wooden frame with deliberate precision. Over, under, over. Nalani hesitated, strands slipping. But Aida murmured encouraging words, and Nalani tried again. Her hands trembled as they woven tighter and straighter. A flaw here, a gap there, but not for lack of care. By midday, her fingers were raw, tinged red from friction against the reeds. Kessia, an older woman with silver-streaked braids, pressed a small poultice into her palm-soft beeswax, mixed with healing herbs, and rubbed it into Nalani's sore skin. Nalani closed her eyes, savoring the caring gesture. Meanwhile, Caton hovered nearby, silent support, but his proud gaze lifted her spirit. She glanced at him, and he offered a slight nod, encouraging and tender. She swallowed, telling herself, "You belong here." In the rear courtyard, Aida handed Nalani a small bundle, a cloth wrap containing a painted wooden dish and a spoon. "Feed the children," Aida urged, nodding toward a group of youngsters sitting cross-legged beneath a shade. Shyly, Nalani lifted the wrap and approached them. Many sat still, curious eyes peering at her. She placed the dish down front, and a grouping of mashed berries and pounded nuts spilled inside. A tiny voice said, "Thank you." Nalani blinked and offered a shy smile. Soon, multiple children reached for spoons, giggling as the sweet, nutty mash disappeared. "Like feeding your own," Kessia commented, nudging Nalani gently. She closed her eyes, heart swelling. She realized that every task-corn grinding, weaving, feeding tied her not to the world she'd left, but to this one. Each chore stitched another thread between her and the tribe. After the meal, the matriarch women gathered around a low fire to sun-dry slices of meat. Nalani moved to help, lifting a slab of deer and weaving it gently onto sharpened shrubs to hang. She sensed Caton behind her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone reminded her. She was proving her place not by words, but by actions. The midday heat beat down, but Nalani welcomed the work. Sweat soaked her hair, and the raw ache in her hands echoed a deeper satisfaction. She was no longer too much, or not enough. She was exactly what was needed. At last, the women paused. Nalani stood, her hands grimy, her clothes dust, smudged, her heart full. Nalani approached, wrapped her shawl around Nalani's shoulders, and offered a bowl of cool water. Nalani washed her face and hands. The women murmured approval, a blessing, even while Caton stepped forward and grasped her hand, squeezing it once. "You learn," he said softly. "You give. It is good," she replied, voice thick with emotion. That day, as the sun began its descent and shadows stretched across the courtyard, Nalani felt something lift off her shoulders. The work had grounded her. It had taught her value, humility, endurance, and belonging. She was no longer just the bearer of wounds or outsider. She was one of them, strong, capable, and needed. And as she walked back toward their dwelling, Caton's arm around her, she knew that every bead of sweat and every sore fingertip was a step deeper into a new life, one built truly with her own hands and heart. That evening, the village gathered at the communal fiery ritual of stories, memories, and soft laughter. Flickering flames, shadows on red rock walls, and the smell of cedar smoke filled the air. Nalani, dressed in simple leggings and a woven tunic gifted by Nayla, settled beside Caton on a worn hide mat. The rhythm of drums began a low pulse that called hearts to listen. Nayli started, her hands expressive, eyes bright with memory. She told a story in Apache, and Kaitan interpreted quietly so Nalani could understand. It was about the first white settler who aided the tribe, then departed but whose kindness had changed the course of a famine season. The story ended with a lesson. No matter your origin, actions define you. The crowd murmured agreement, nodding. Nalani felt warmth surge through her chest. This was inclusion, not token acknowledgement. Afterwards, Kayetan turned to her. "My mother," he began quietly, fingering the braid wrapped around his wrist, a thin leather cord from his childhood. "She gave it to me when I was small." He fingered a charm, at its end a carved deer, slender and graceful. Nalani watched him, nodding. It was the first moment he shared something from his past as more than fact. "Tell me about her," she said softly. He closed his eyes. The firelight shimmered. "She believed healing began in the heart," he said, "that you must know pain to understand healing." He paused, the air thick with memories. "She taught me all medicine roots and prayer songs. Before she died, she told me, 'Carry this gift where it matters.'" His fingers traced over the carved deer. "I wear her braid so I do not lose her voice." Nalini's breath caught. She reached out, brushing her fingers over the braid and charm. "She sounds wise," she whispered. Kaitan met her gaze. She was. Then Nalani shared a memory, Toa memory she had buried. "My mother died when I was young," she whispered in return. She swallowed. "Spindletop fever. She held me that night, her voice soft. She told me I was enough, beautiful in my own way." Nalani paused, remembering the curve of her mother's cheek and the lullaby she sang. "I forgot that voice for so long." Kaitan turned his head, pressing his back against the wall. "But you did not forget it all," he said. "Your hand spoke for it today." She pressed her fingertips to her lips, remembering the taste of the evening breeze as she shared the fire with villagers. "I thought I arrived broken," she said. "Now I feel stronger." Kaitan looked at the fire, embers drifting upward. "When we heal others, we heal ourselves." Nalani nodded, heart tender. "Yes." Nayali called softly from behind them. A small bowl was placed before Nalani, sweet pounded berries and crisp seeds, a gift after stories. The gratitude in her heart overflowed. She scooped a spoonful and offered it to Kaitan. He took it with a soft smile, placing his hand over hers. They sat like the Thans, touching, sharing, bridging world's unspoken truths, flowing between them. As night deepened, their fingers interlaced, a gesture sacred and natural. Nalani leaned into him. They did not speak love yet. This was gentler, a soft seed planted. The drums ceased. Silence settled into the canyon. The two sat embraced by the hush, by belonging, by kinship deeper than outsiders could ever guess. And Nalani realized she had found more than acceptances. He had found a home, woven not by duty but by hearts. Mid-morning sun filtered through the canyon's red walls as Nalani walked toward the center of the village. Today was revered, the naming ceremony. The air buzzed with anticipation. Children paused in their play, women closed their loom strands mid-weave, hunters rested their bowstrings. Even the wind seemed still, as if holding its breath. Nayali stood at the ceremonial circle, stones arranged in a perfect ring atop smooth sandstone. Elders and kin filled the space, wearing their finest garb beadwork, feathers, painted markings. Kaitan stood beside her, sinew-wrapped staff in hand, braid and charm glinting softly at his wrist. Nalani's heart thrummed with equal parts, pride, fear, and wonder. At Nayali's nod, Nalani stepped into the ring, feeling the soles of her boots kiss sacred soil. Every motion drew eyes not judging, but studying with held respect. The hush was profound. With each footfall, she felt the weight of ceremony, of belonging, of transformation. Nayali began the ritual chant, a low, ancient melody that rippled like wind over canyon ridges. Others joined in harmony, the sound swelling, reaching into Nalani's chest and lifting something buried. Kaitan turned to Nalani and murmured softly, "Stand tall." She inhaled deeply and straightened, eyes closed, letting the sound wash through her, across her flesh, into her bones. When the chanting stopped, Nellie spoke in Apache, her voice resonant. Through Caton's translation, Nalini understood. Nalinith, one who carries the light of dawn in her heart. Her new name, chosen not for her past, not for shame or judgment, but for the light she had become. The meaning rolled over Hirsch, carried dawn, hope, possibility. Nayeli stepped forward, took Nalani's hands, and placed a delicate cord around her neck, a strand of braided willow interwoven with creek beads and a single feather from the canyon hawk. Nalani could feel the cord's power, the braided willow, the stones, the feather, all symbols of strength, rootedness, vision. Nalani looked down at the cord, her tired fingers touching it gently, reverently. A warmth lit inside her chest. This wasn't borrowed identity, it was earned, woven from trust, from action, from heart. Caton knelt before her and placed his hand over the feather. Your name will echo in song, in fire gatherings, in stories mothers tell their daughters. In that moment, she saw herself whole, a woman of two worlds, but belonging fully to this one. The villagers erupted in gentle applause, soft drumbeats, and excited murmurs welcoming her into their hearts. Children raced to touch the cord, to whisper in her ear, "Welcome, sister." She responded with tears, words trapped in her throat, nods, smiles. Nellie touched Caton's shoulder. He smiled with pride and relief, meeting Nalani's gaze. No words were said, but everything passed between them. Gratitude, love, honor. As ceremony ended, Nalani walked through the crowd. Each person offered their blessing. An elder laid a comb of carved stone in her hand. A young woman braided her hair. A boy pressed a small charm into her palm. Stones, beads, feather tokens that told her she belonged. Nalani's arms grew heavy with gifts, but her heart soared. At the circle's edge, Caton gathered her close. "Welcome home," he whispered. "I feel it," she replied softly, eyes closed against the sun. They stood there, under the canyon sky, she as Nalanitha, one who carries dawn. That evening, after the arid sun had dipped behind the canyon walls, a child shrieked and ran toward Nabani's dwelling. A young girl named Awinita had fallen from a low ledge, blood trickling from her scraped arm. Her mother followed close behind, her eyes wide with fear. Nalani felt her heart tighten. She exchanged a glance with Caton. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, the ceremony name heavy in her chest but stronger than any fear. Awinita's mother knelt beside her daughter, murmuring reassurance. Nalani knelt too, gently brushing loose dirt from the wound. It was jagged, tender to the bone. A collective hush settled. The hush of desperation and hope, ancient and powerful. Caton caught her hand for a moment before stepping back, giving her space. No placation, just trust. Nalani drew from what she'd learned. She dipped a strip of clean cloth into water, brewed with yucca and sage, pressing it to the cut. Then she crushed wild lavender and cedar leaves, mixing them into a thick paste. Her fingers trembled, but the paste was steady, fragrant. She pressed it into the wound, whispering a soft lullaby she remembered from her mother. Not in Apache, but in English, a song of courage. Awinita didn't cry. Instead, she watched Nalani with wide, trusting eyes. When the paste was applied, Nalani wrapped the arm loosely, knotting it with care. Then she took the girl's small other hand and pressed her own pulse against it. "You are brave," she whispered. Silence broke as the crowd exhaled. Awinita's mother brushed tears from the little girl's face, nodding. "Thank you," she said in soft Apache. Nalani answered with a bow and remembered the gentle, newly learned phrase of gratitude. "Iehi." The mother repeated it with a nod, a smile blooming in her eyes. She clasped Nalani's hand and pressed it to her forehead, honoring her healing gift. Children huddled around, eyes shining. "Can you heal me next?" one asked. Nalani laughed softly, ruffling hair. "Maybe," she promised. Caton stepped forward, placing an arm around Nalani's shoulders. "My sister," he said proudly, and said it again, in Apache this time. The villagers echoed the name respectfully. Nalani felt tears sting. Her eyes flicked toward Kaitan. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. He smiled, blanket around them both. "You believed in someone else first." A hush fell as those gathered lingered. Then Aida brought a small bowl of sweet corn porridge. Nalani accepted it and offered a bowl to Kaitan. They ate side by side, their steam rising into the night air. A wood-framed fire was lit nearby, the flames steady and welcoming. The women and children formed a circle, inviting Nalani and Kaitan to join. They sat together, backs to the fire, facing the gathering. The tribe's elders, hunters, and mothers were Therisolent witnesses to this moment. A bit of whispering began. Then Sitara stood and tapped a small druma cue. Another beat, low and sure, then another. The tribe joined in, their voices harmonizing, inviting Nalani to speak. She took a breath, closing her eyes. "I am honored," she began in Apache, halting but true. "My heart is full of gratitude. I promise to learn, to help, and to protect." She glanced at Kaitan. "And to use what I've been shown for all of you." The applause broke like sunrise. Women touched her arm. Children offered stones and feathers. Hunters nodded with solemn approval. The night sky pressed down with stars. Flames danced upward in response. Nalani felt an unshakable peace wash through her belonging, not just to a tribe, but to a purpose. Each vow echoed in her bones. Kaitan leaned in. "You are one of us," he murmured. "And you believed?" she replied, her voice steady. They stayed by that fire as long as it burned. Under its glow, they found their truth. The courage to care had bridged worlds. And in choosing trust for each other and for this new family, they had both found what they were truly made for. Early morning hush cloaked the canyon as Nalani and Kaitan walked beneath a towering juniper, their sacred tree. Its roots curled into the earth like ancient serpents, and its branches reached skyward, branches older than memory. The first light filtered through leathery needles, casting mottled patterns on the ground. Kaitan paused and gestured for Nalani to sit on a smooth, flat rock at the tree's base. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. Neither spoke at first. Only the wind and occasional bird call filled the silence. Then Kaitan reached into his pouch and produced the braided leather cord from his wrist token from his naming ceremony with his mother's death braid. He pressed it into Nalani's hands. "This," he said softly, "is my mother's braid. It held me when I could not walk alone." He waited until she accepted it, then continued. "You carried me through storms, carried my wound when it was broken, carried hope when I could not. You have been the light in darkness." Nalani's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes. She touched the braided leather carefully. "You've given me wings," he whispered. "And roots." She pressed a hand to her heart. "You gave me air to fly." Their fingers intertwined. Under the juniper, they were no longer healer and patient. They were two souls equal, intertwined, open. The tree's low branches offered shelter, as though nature itself embraced their connection. Nalani closed her eyes and let the moment settle in, like the slow unfolding of dawn. Kaitan spoke again. "Your life was not yours alone. You lived in shadows of expectations that told you to make yourself small, unnoticeable." Nalani nodded. She had hidden, starved herself of identity and voice. "I was invisible." Kaitan's voice was gentle but insistent. "Here, among my people, you are seen, you are valued, and you shine." Nalani reached for a small knife strapped to her belt. She cut the braid's end and tied it to her own corda melding of birth and chosen belonging. Kaitan watched, breath steady. When she finished, she looked at him, eyes glistening. "I carry you," she said. He reached over and brushed stray hair from her face. "And I carry you." They remained there, rooted and free, under the sacred tree, two individuals who had found their hearts in the desert's depths. After a long moment, Nalani spoke quietly. "Thank you for trusting me, for staying." Caton's smile was soft and whole. "Thank you for seeing me," he replied. Then he stood, offering his hand to her. She took it. Together, they stepped away from the tree and back toward the village, ready to face whatever would come with trust and unity. If this story or video touched your heart, please leave a 2 in the comments. I want to extend my sincerest thanks to you. The wind shifted. It was subtle at first, dry sage, rustling in an odd rhythm, birds falling silent mid-song. Children paused their play as a strange unease settled over the village. Nayeli stepped out from her lodge, eyes narrowing at the edge of the horizon. Cayetan was already at the perimeter with 2 scouts. His stance stiffened. Dust rose in the distance, not from a storm, but from riders. Fast, urgent, purposeful. Nalani stood behind him, clutching the edge of her shawl. "What is it?" she whispered. Cayetan did not answer immediately. His gaze stayed locked on the growing cloud. Too many for a visit. Too straight for a hunt. A horn call echoed from the watch post. A warning. Within minutes, the entire village began moving like clockwork. Children gathered into homes. Hunters armed themselves with bows and spears. Elders gathered herbs and water. Nayeli handed Nalani a bundle of medicine tools. "Stay close. You are not just healer, you are hope now." The riders came into view. Soldiers, not the ones Cayetan knew, not peacekeepers. These men wore the dust of long marches and eyes too hungry. Their flag was half torn. Their leader rode ahead without signaling peace. Cayetan moved forward, spear gripped tight. Nalani stepped beside him. "We face them together." He gave her a warning glance, but didn't push her away. Not anymore. Then another rider, from the opposite side of the ridge. Dust trailing behind a single horse, lean and furious. Lord Worthington. Nalani gasped. The wind caught her breath as her father pulled reins near the soldiers and raised a hand in defiance. His voice carried rough and commanding. "These lands are under protection of my name. I'll not see war brought to them." The lead soldier spat. "You traded your daughter for silence. Now silence stays broken." Cayetan stiffened. Nalani felt her stomach twist. Lord Worthington's voice dropped an octave. "You come for blood? Then you'll find mine first." The tension crackled. The soldiers fanned out. Cayetan turned slightly toward Nalani. "Go, find Nayeli. Ready the salves." Nalani grabbed his wrist. "And you?" He looked at her. Gaze softer than the words he spoke. "I will not let their shadows fall here." She nodded, her fingers pressing a promise into his skin before she turned and ran, heart pounding, mind racing, the name Nalani echoing inside like a war drum. The first arrow struck the earth with a hiss, embedding itself in dry soil just inches from Lord Worthington's horse. A soldier shouted. Chaos unfurled. Like lightning from a summer sky, the first clash erupted. Cayetan surged forward with his warriors, their feet pounding against the cracked ground. No battle cry, only grim purpose. Arrows loosed, spears collided. The sound of bone, breath, and fury roared through the canyon. Lord Worthington dismounted, drawing his revolver. Though outnumbered, his aim was precise. He shot not to kill, but to protect. "Hold the left flank," he barked to Apache fighters, earning a moment of shocked respect. Meanwhile, Nalani sprinted toward Nayeli's hut, breath sharp and ragged. Inside, Nayeli had already laid out poultices, boiled water, strips of clean hide, crushed willow bark. "Good," she said, without turning. "You remembered." Outside, the wounded began arriving. A boy, no older than 14, with a deep gash across his ribs. Nalani knelt beside him. Her fingers trembled, but her focus remained. She cleaned the wound with boiled yucca wash, packed it with moss soaked in sage oil, and wrapped him tight. "Breathe," she whispered. "You will not fall today." Next came an elder with a dislocated shoulder, then a girl with a shattered forearm. Nalani moved between them like water over stone, unshaken, relentless. The fire outside the hut cast flickering shadows on her face, illuminating sweat and blood, but also clarity. She was no longer the woman who once cowered beneath silk and scorn. Here, she wielded balm and blessing like armor. The sounds of war surged louder. Outside, Caton fought like a tempest. His braid came undone, blood streaked across his jaw, but his form never faltered. Every time he faltered backward, a warrior stepped beside him. Behind him, the tribe fought as one like branches of the same root. Lord Worthington covered the rear, eyes darting constantly to spot Nalani's location. Once, when Caton was nearly surrounded, he fired 2 shots that sent the assailants tumbling. Caton caught his Gazian for the briefest instant. The men nodded, wordless allies. But the enemy kept coming. A soldier burst into the edge of the healer's circle. Nalani turned, bloodied pestle in hand, shielding a child behind her. Before he could advance, an arrow pierced the soldier's chest. Caton stood just beyond the firelight. Their eyes met. He had seen her ready to fight with herbs and heart. And he had come. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Inside, Nayli whispered, "This land will remember her." The battle roared on, but something had shifted. The earth beneath their feet, churned with blood and dust, now held more than survival. It held a people fighting not just for their homes, but for a future shaped by unity. And amid the fire and smoke, Nalani stood tall no longer, just healer, not just daughter or outcast. She was the soul of the village. When the final shot echoed across the canyon, it wasn't with rage but with silence. The kind that falls when the wind no longer carries a cry, when breath is held between memory and mourning. The last of the invading soldiers had fled. The few left behind lay unconscious or restrained. Smoke from burnt sage mixed with gunpowder. The battleground was quiet now, but not still. Caton stumbled into the clearing, shoulder torn by a blade's kiss, blood soaking into his tunic. Nalani dropped the bowl in her hand and rushed to him. He fell to one knee before her, not from defeat, but exhaustion. "You stood," he murmured. "You stood when I could not." Her fingers trembled as they searched his wounds. "You came when I needed you most." Nayli appeared beside them, already applying pressure. "He lives," she said calmly, "but there will be scars." Nalani's gaze softened. Scars mean we survived. Across the field, Lord Worthington approached. His coat was torn, hat lost, and one hand clutched a bloodied arm. His eyes landed on Nalanino with command, not with disappointment, but with a kind of reverent disbelief. "You saved them," he said hoarsely. "You saved them all." Nalani stood, wiping blood from her cheek. We saved each other." They looked at one another, father and daughter, for the first time without pretense. The hurt still lingered between them, like old rope frayed at the edges. But for the first time, it wasn't what defined them. "I was wrong," he said, "about what strength looked like. About what you needed to be." Nalani's voice trembled. "And I was wrong to think I had to disappear to be seen." He nodded slowly, and then something he had never done. He bowed low and deliberate before Caton, who sat watching with steady breath. It was not surrender, it was acknowledgement. Caton nodded in return. Later, as the fires were extinguished and the wounded tended to, Nalani walked to the sacred juniper tree alone. She carried a small pouch. Inside, the fragments of cloth stained by battle, a feather gifted by a child she saved, and a stone her mother had once held in the manor garden. She placed the pouch at the base of the tree. "For the woman I was," she whispered, "and the one I became." Behind her, Caton approached, bandaged, limping but alive. He offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. Together, they stood in silence as the stars began to reclaim the sky. The earth had taken its toll, but it had given back tenfold. Peace, hard-won and fragile, settled in like dusk. And in that stillness, Nalani knew the fire had taken, but it had also given. Even her truth, even her tribe, even her home. If you've watched this far, we're truly grateful. A like would be a huge motivation for us to keep creating more meaningful stories. The sun returned gentle after the storm. It poured gold across the canyon, lighting up the scorched earth and the still-standing dwellings like a benediction. Smoke no longer meant ruin, it meant the morning meal, herbs drying by fire, cedar simmering in peace. Nalani stood outside the lodge she now shared with Caton. It was modest walls woven from river reeds and hides, roof thatched with juniper branches, but to her, it was a cathedral. Inside, Caton rested on a woven mat, still healing. When she returned with fresh water, he sat up, smiling faintly. "You walk lighter now," he said. She nodded, placing the water beside him. "Because I carry less shame." Outside, the village hummed with quiet joy. Women repaired fishing nets. Boys ran barefoot through the red dust. The old men carved flutes from soft pine. No one spoke of the battle and hushed fervently in gratitude. In the center square, Naili guided children through planting new sage. "The earth remembers," she told them, "so give it reason to remember kindness." Nalani joined her later, her fingers pressing seeds into warm soil. A small girl tugged her sleeve. "Nalani," she asked in a hushed tone, "were you afraid?" Nalani kneed. "Yes, very. But you stayed?" "I stayed," she whispered, brushing dust from the child's cheek, "because staying sometimes means becoming." At sundown, the tribe gathered for the first full meal since the battle. Venison stew, cactus fruit, roasted maize. No grand speeches, just passing bowls, shared laughter, the crackle of fire between stories. Lord Worthington sat at the edge of the circle, quiet, respectful, no longer imposing, but present. He accepted food with gratitude, offered no commands, and listened more than he spoke. Nalani noticed how he watched her pride blooming gently, silently. Later that night, as stars dusted the sky, Caton took her hand. "We've planted more than seeds here," he said. Nalani looked toward the distant ridge, where once she had feared the world. Now it welcomed her in every breeze, every footprint beside hers in the dust. "Yes," she said, "we've planted belonging." And the land, she knew, would answer with bloom. The sky turned indigo as the drumbeats began. In the heart of the village, a sacred circle had been drawn in ash and sage, encircling a fire kindled with juniper and sweetgrass. The whole tribe had gathered, some in feathered robes, others with faces painted in ochre and blue, children perched on their mothers' laps with wide eyes. Tonight was not only a celebration of love, but of survival, of unity, of beginnings, reborn from ashes. Nalani stood at the edge of the circle, her dark hair braided with white shell beads and small strands of eagle feather. Her dress was hand-stitched by Naili, soft doskin dyed with crushed berries and sun. Her hands, though scarred from tending wounds, looked radiant under the firelight. Caton entered from the other side of the circle, his wounds bandaged, his steps firm despite healing flesh. He wore no armor, only a tunic dyed in red earth and symbols of the moon phases painted on his arm signifying balance, rebirth, and protection. They met in the center. No priest, no vow in books, only fire. Naili stepped forward, holding two bolson with water drawn at dawn, the other with ash from the village hearth. She anointed each of them, murmuring a prayer. Then she placed the bowls at their feet. "Water remembers, fire transforms. You are both," she said. Caton reached into his pouch and pulled out the braided cord Nalani had tied with his mother's braid. He placed it in her hand. She added to each a new strand, woven from the hair she had cut herself the night she chose to stay. Together, they tied it around a carved branch and set it into the fire. The crowd exhaled in unison. Smoke spiraled upward, and in it, Nalani saw not just union but destiny. Two lines that had twisted, tangled, and at last fused. Not perfectly, not without scare, but unbreakably. Children danced around them with laughter like birdsong. Drums pulsed like a heartbeat rising. And when Caton took her hand again, it was not with possession, nor rescue, nor dependence. It was partnership, Later, as stars arched over them like a woven canopy, Lord Worthington approached her, hesitated, then placed a small carved horse in her palm. "Your mother carved it," he said, "for the daughter we didn't yet know how to raise." "Oh." Nalani smiled. "You still helped me find my path." He nodded, tears hidden behind pride. "Number, you blazed it." The fire crackled beside them, flames reaching skyward. And Nalani knew. This was not just a marriage of hearts. It was a covenant with the land, with the people, with the woman she had become. Years passed like petals on the stream, soft, steady, sacred. Seasons came and went in the canyon. Rains that filled riverbeds, summers thick with the hum of bees, winters where stories were woven by firelight. The village grew not in conquest, but in connection. Those once divided by bloodlines now broke bread together. Nalani became more than healer. She was a voice the mothers trusted, a guide the daughters listened to, a keeper of both remedy and remembrance. She taught the young how to crush juniper for fever, how to listen to the wind for warnings, how to see beyond the body and into the ache of a soul. Children called her grandmother before her hair turned silver. In the mornings, she walked the ridges with Cayetan, now chief by quiet consensus. He ruled not from dominance, but from steadiness, from trust. Together, they planted more than herbs, they planted stories. One evening, they sat upon the high red rock above the valley, the same stone where once they had stood in silence, unsure of what tomorrow held. Now, tomorrow had become yesterday, and yet still full of wonder. Cayetan held her hand, calloused and soft with time. "You still listen to the wind?" "Every day," Nalani smiled. "It still remembers." Below them, the village bustled, smoke curling from hearths, voices rising in song. Two girls practiced a healing chant Nalani had once whispered during war. A young boy carved the same pattern into wood that she had traced on Maka's chest years ago. Legacy. Not grand, not carved in marble, but alive in hands, in memory, in breath. Behind them, the wind stirred. Nalani closed her eyes. She heard voices, some old, some new, her mother's lullaby, Nili's soft laughter, the hush of a child once saved, the drum of Cayetan's heartbeat the day they wed. And then Cayetan's voice, warm and sure. "I knew, even then." "Knew what?" she asked, leaning into him. "That you would become everything the world tried to silence." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And you would be the echo that made me brave." Above them, the stars shimmered, not as distant lights, but as memories looking back, watching, blessing, beckoning. For those who've walked through decades of silence, of being unseen or misunderstood, this story is not just fiction, it's a mirror. True Wild West stories are often about outlaws and gunfights, but the truest ones, the ones that last, are about healing and homecoming. To every woman who was once told she was too much or not enough, to every soul who carried shame like a second skin, Nalani's journey is a reminder. Strength comes not from defiance, but from the quiet refusal to disappear. In the stillness of age, when memories drift like dust across a porch bathed in twilight, some may recall their own canyons of loneliness. Some will remember a time they wished someone had stayed. This story stays. It sits beside you like an old friend, whispering that transformation is possible, even after the world has written you off. That redemption isn't always loud, it grows from the soil of scars. And in that truth, the West lives again not in violence or conquest, but in the courage to begin again.